digitaljamsessions.com. Hello and welcome to this Digital Jam session. Today we are joined by the lovely Wendy and Aira from Distill It. There's a much longer name to that podcast, but Wendy, you're going to explain what the full name is.
You got it, Tanya. First of all, thank you so much for having Aira and I on today. We are the Distillery, and we run a sports, leisure, lifestyle webcast called Distill It, a 360-degree view of life in sports, where we talk about all things sports, mostly off the field, but around the field.
Wonderful. Thank you. And would you care to explain your background a little bit? Because I think our lovely listeners will probably recognize your voice from previous episodes, where previously you were with a different company.
I was. So my background has been a lot of years of working in marketing consulting and business strategy, but I had an incredible experience working with you actually at Jagex as the chief marketing officer for just over a year, where I took a lot of experience that I brought from my days working with Sony and Sony Electronics in many different forms, to marketing RuneScape and other of the products Jagex had. But I am now working on building a business that helps athletes distill and repurpose their athletic intelligence to create a better life for themselves after they finish their athletic careers. And that's where Aira, my distinguished partner, comes in. But I have to say this topic is very exciting for me because it marries my love of gaming, which, Tanya, you know I enjoy, and sports, which is a deep, long passion of mine.
Wonderful. And Aira, would you care to explain a little bit more about your background and where you were before you joined up with the wonderful Wendy?
She is a wonder. I oftentimes refer to Wendy as such. I have spent nearly 2 decades in business management for the entertainment industry, and I have helped several clients sort of transition something beyond what their longtime careers have been. I grew up an athlete, and sports has always been a passion of mine, not only because I love the physical activity of it, but also because I really sort of hone in on that athletic mindset to sort of approach every single different angle of my life. And so I always knew that I would figure out a way to marry both my professional experience with my passion for sports and do something that I not only am good at, but really enjoy doing and have a whole lot of fun with. Mm-hmm. And when Wendy and I decided a few years ago to come, together and find something that we wanted to really spend some professional time doing, we thought this would be it. And so we set up the distillery, and we've had, like I said, a great deal of fun working with some really amazing, talented clients and helping them distill and repurpose their athletic intelligence.
Wonderful. Well, the conversation today is perfect for this array of expertise, because we are talking about the future of eSports and how the eSports industry can learn from the real sports industry and vice versa. Now, I find this quite interesting because there are a great amount of people in the world who do not necessarily follow esports or know what it is. And on the flip side of that coin, there are also a reasonable amount of the population who don't necessarily follow sports either. So I think I find it quite interesting because there are obviously some very base similarities, but I think the area of real interest here is in the fact that esports athletes, because they are called athletes, these people who essentially play video games, and they do this in a professional capacity. They are part of a league. They enter different tournaments. They have a team. They have pro teams that they will be part of. And they have a very strict training regime. People don't think that that is necessarily the case for somebody who sits in front of a computer and plays a game, essentially. And I find it quite interesting because there are obviously a lot of similar mindsets that need to be considered, because you're still talking about a winning mindset and a attitude towards winning, which is still fundamentally the same, irrespective of what the sport may be, still fundamentally the same. And I'm curious from your perspectives, obviously you're dealing with athletes who have been doing this for a very long time, but there will be some very fundamental aspects of the way that an athlete thinks when they are in that training process or they are entering into a career in whichever sport it may be, where there is a shift in mentality, where they have to stop thinking like, somebody who isn't an athlete or, a kind of civilian, as some might say, before they kind of enter into the pro life of a sports athlete. There are some significant changes that need to occur, some disciplines that need to occur. And I'm curious from your perspective what those are and how you think those might translate for somebody who is entering into the esports industry.
Well, I think, first of all, you hit it right, the nail right on the head, Tanya, with the fact that you have to have a winning mentality that is going to push you individually to put in the hours that you have to do, whether you're sitting in front of a computer or not. And I have to believe there's a great debate about the term athlete for people who engage in esports compared to somebody who's using their physical body. But I couldn't agree with you more. It's got to be a winning attitude, because in order to get to the top of anything that you do in life, you have to put in the hours. You have to have discipline. You have to push yourself to do better. You have to engage with people that are better than you. Mm. And you also have to be a mentor for people who aren't as good as you are, because when you play on a team, and the one thing I will say is esports it's a team mentality. The biggest games are not, single guys going out there and competing on their own, right? Mm-hmm. These are teams. You have to be able to play well on a team, and you also have to be able to mentor people that are coming up behind you, because as well as they're going to do, you're going to do.
It's interesting, though, what Wendy commented there about this idea of that for esports, it's about team mentality. And one of the obvious kind of comparisons there in terms of team sports would be American football. Sorry, I'm British, so I'm going to keep on calling it American football. But
it's okay. We understand the lingo.
Yes.
With the American football, one of the things I found quite interesting, because I'll be honest, I will acknowledge I am not a football fan of any sort, whether it's soccer or American football. So I don't have necessarily a deep understanding of the complexities of the tactics involved. One of the things that I found quite interesting was that during the Super Bowl, there was this kind of conversation around whether or not somebody should watch the Super Bowl via Sky TV or whether they should watch it via BBC. And somebody said, don't watch it on the BBC because they over-explain everything and it just slows down the game for you. So I immediately thought, well, you know what? I don't know anything about this, but I'm going to watch it on the BBC. And it was perfect because they actually explained the tactics for me. They explained to me what the stakes were and what the risks were if each team didn't do the thing that they were talking about that they needed to do next. And so, when we get down to this, last 2 minutes, you really felt the tension because you understood actually, 2 minutes is a heck of a long time in this game and there's still a huge amount that could happen. And without having somebody to explain that, it's very difficult for somebody who doesn't, actively follow a sport to know necessarily what's involved. And I think it's the same with esports, where there are actually very complex strategies at hand that we don't necessarily, as if you're not a gamer of that particular game, you're not necessarily going to understand what those tactics and those strategies are, and you're not necessarily going to understand what it is that you're seeing in front of you. And that idea of the value of tactics and the value of each individual within the team being incredibly important to the team as a whole. And that with American football, it's that whole thing between offense and defense, and having those two different groups of players that you kind of bring onto the field at the right time. There is a real dynamic there that I don't think is necessarily understood by audiences for esports, but also to a certain extent by the teams themselves. And I'm curious, Arla, from your perspective, that obviously this is one of the quite complex parts about a sport, is the strategy and the tactics that these team players are learning how to kind of, bond together, but also to be able to how to read each other and understand what needs to happen in that team dynamic. And what kind of skill sets can we take from the, that locker room mentality, if you like, and actually bring it into these very digital strategies that need to be kind of played out in a virtual environment as such in a game, but they're still strategies nonetheless.
No, absolutely. And I think that's really the focus for me. I mean, aside from being a sports fan, aside from the professional work that we do in the world of sports, I'm a parent of 2 kids who I'm, raising very rooted in sports. Mm-hmm. And certainly in this day and age, I think it's so important for them to be both tech savvy and to have a really firm understanding of sports, because I love sports. We will watch sports, we will play sports, and that's going to be a huge part of our lives from here on out. But when I have, conversation with people about whether or not all kids should be playing sports in this day and age, I think it's so great that kids have other options, because at the end of the day, what I want my kids to walk away with are those skill sets that you were talking about earlier. And whether we're talking about the traditional set of sports or we're talking about e-gaming, I think that's the important thing to highlight, really. When Wendy and I were setting up our company a few years ago, and we were playing around with different ideas, I knew that I wanted to really focus around this whole idea of athletic intelligence. And I wanted to really be able to hone in on what athletic intelligence is for athletes and how to help them redefine that for our clients. Athletic intelligence has a few different definitions, but at the end of the day, it's pretty basic. It's the ability to really optimally visualize information in someone's mind's eye, to be able to learn and recall plays, to be able to quickly react to stimuli, make rapid decisions for extended periods of time. All of those skills apply to traditional athletes, but certainly to e-gaming athletes. I mean, cyber athletes very much use the same skill sets that we are familiar with associating with traditional athletes. And those are the skill sets that I think we want to be able to make sure that our kids are growing up learning, whether that comes to, playing and participating in traditional sports or being really tech savvy and enjoying that through e-gaming.
That's interesting that you're talking there about that kind of whole mindset, or the kind of the zone of being able to make rapid decisions for an extended period of time, which is very much at the heart of good quality, esports, is that idea that you are able to be reactionary and respond in a very short period of time, but over a long period of time, because games can last for hours,
Hours, sure.
And certainly you're continuing to keep on playing. So for an esports team, you could be at it for 12 hours,
sure,
playing a tournament.
And I want to add one thing to what Ava was saying, because she said it so well, but you mentioned also about playing on a team. One of the things about playing on a team in professional sports, physical sports, instead of esports, is, understanding each other's strengths and weaknesses and playing to those. And, that's, if you use the American football analogy of a quarterback, a quarterback understands and knows what the strengths and weaknesses are at each of the positions that he's standing behind, especially on the offense. And in certain situations, he's able to draw on, his teammates' strengths versus what their weaknesses are, depending on what the defense does. It's the same thing in esports. You have to understand when to put somebody in what they're great at doing, and using all of those strengths to help you overcome your opponent. So I don't see it being that different.
It's interesting as well, because I feel like, especially with the kind of evolution into VR esports, I know, lovely listeners, I haven't managed to get very far without saying VR, but you know what you're coming for when you come here. But the thing with esports is we are starting to see this shift into immersive esports, and that's been apparent with the Intel ESL Immersive Challenge or VR Championship that they're launching, with Echo Arena as one of the game titles. Now, when we look at some of those games and we look at people, in a VR headset playing some of these games, and we look at the emergence of VR and immersive gyms with things like Black Box Gym, it's actually quite physical. We're talking about a proper workout for some of these players, when you spend an extended amount of time in a headset, throwing yourself around and throwing your body around, is actually quite physical. And I can begin to see where there would be this kind of crossover bridge between a traditional athlete who maybe plays a particular normal sport, to being able to take those skill sets and actually put them into a VR game version of that sport and take advantage of those muscle memories, those things that they're used to doing, those reflexes that they've honed over their lifetime, and actually be able to play, whether it's a basketball game or whatever the VR game might be, and actually transfer those skills across into a VR environment. I wonder if that's something that you've ever considered, the idea of an alternative utilization of muscle memory into these digital environments.
I have to be honest in saying I had not thought about it, but you're probably very correct. And, it's it's something that, if an athlete is passionate about it, which I have to say nowadays with the way kids grow up, any athlete coming in to any sport, I'm sure has a side addiction to some kind of, game, electronic game. I mean, it is what kids do nowadays. So,
well, it reminds me of our kids' flag football game several weeks ago,
right. That's a great
where
point.
the opposing team's coach, all he did was run through Madden plays.
Yeah.
The entire game. His players were amazing on the field. I mean, he coached his team.
5-year-olds.
These are 5 and 6-year-old boys, and he coached them to victory. They beat us by a lot.
Wow.
And these are boys who go home and they play Madden. And so the coach plays Madden, so he's very familiar with whatever's going on. I mean, I don't play any of this. I can't get into any of the details. But the point is, these kids go from Madden at home to football on the field, and they were amazing.
Yeah, I actually had pulled the coach aside because I'm like, you're running plays that are like well beyond the years of these kids, right? And they were executing.
They were executing.
And he's like, Madden. And I went, what? You use Madden? He's like, yeah, that's what I do. I pick the plays on Madden that I think the kids can do. And that's how we run through them. And then that's what the kids get out and practice. So, it's interesting as you were talking too, I was thinking to myself, I'm sure 10 or 15 years from now, there's going to be a lot of debate in the esports world about injuries or health issues that are coming out of, players sitting in front of a computer screen for 12 hours or having a VR headset on them, what it's doing to them. So,
but you know what?
These
big leagues and even some of the colleges who actually have institutions devoted to just this are phenomenal. Are phenomenal because they have coaches, they have analysts, they have nutritionists, they have everything that a traditional sports team needs.
Absolutely, they do.
Required to do their thing, which is mind-blowing. But it's mind-blowing. I think that they're always taking into account these things.
Yeah.
This is one of those things, it's a common misconception. You say esports and people just think geeky kids sitting in front of a computer screen. And when you say, pro esports, it's a very different kettle of fish. You're talking about, prize pots easily, certainly for the VR Champions League that they've put together, it's, 200,000 is the prize pot. But you can see prize pots easily getting into the millions in some of these tournaments.
They are already.
And depending on which tournament or which league you're playing in and which country, which territory, the American and the, the Asian prize pots are easily millions frequently.
Yeah, they are.
And so they're not messing around when they train these players. They have a strict regimen. They have a schedule. They live in the same house. They're doing physical training. They're doing mental training. They're practicing the game. People just think it's a bunch of kids sitting there eating pizza and tossing about in a house, playing a computer game. But it's actually quite serious business. And the other thing that I think is very interesting, and here it is, it's
University of California in Irvine, where they're hoping to build their program as a funnel to equally like football, American football or basketball or, baseball. It's the same thing. I mean, and we're talking Berkeley, right? A world-renowned.
There's actually a varsity league that is specifically for universities to funnel the university talent into the pro leagues. So it's no different. It's no different to the real deal. And the funny thing as well is
one of the great things, unlike traditional sports, is that college athletes can graduate and they can continue to play their e-sport way beyond their, what we would typically say. I mean, if you're a college athlete and you're single-mindedly focused on just playing your sport, you're going to graduate. If you've graduated and you haven't turned pro, odds are you might have another year or two maybe where you can figure out a way to get in there, go to some of the combines and figure out what's going to happen next. But, if you haven't made it by then, your body, you start to get older, your body shifts and you can't play the way you used to.
Yeah. It's a very short window.
On indefinitely. Yeah. It's amazing. It's a whole new world.
Although it was very interesting, there was a comment about the fact that kids that are coming out of the college programs aren't viewed as I don't want to say good, but not as good as the other players that don't go to the college system because they have to study.
Totally different.
Yeah, because they have to study, and that it takes away from their ability.
But in so many ways, they're better prepared because they're forced to study for other things. Yeah. Whereas again, I mean, you and I see this in our work every day with the colleges and universities that we do work with. College athletes, student athletes are just not prepared. Yeah. For life outside of sports. And that's just not what we're seeing with cyber athletes. It's amazing. Totally different world.
So one of the interesting similarities between both esports and real sports is obviously in terms of gambling and the amount of money that is placed on the outcomes of some of these tournaments and these championships can be quite astounding. I mean, these are industries in and of their own right that sit alongside both sports and esports. And so with that comes a certain degree of responsibility and accountability. And I kind of want to talk a little bit about that because, again, this is one of those areas that I don't think people quite realize that there is such a thing as an esports integrity coalition and that they do actually do drug testing and they do all manner of different testing to ensure that people are not throwing a match and that people are not doing all sorts of, like DOS attacks and all sorts of, no performance enhancing, fluids or drugs in the body, etc. and so forth. So it's actually quite strict because there is a lot of money riding on the outcomes of these games. And with that kind of responsibility, it brings a certain different type of mental pressure. And I'm curious from your experiences with the sports industry as such, when you see that difference between, say, a college player versus a pro player, that difference in responsibility and accountability when it comes to being responsible to make sure that you're not going to do something that is going to reflect badly on you or your team, be that it disqualifies you or be that whether it's a reputational thing, that you have suddenly this additional responsibility. Do you see that happening very frequently?
I think that with very few exceptions, athletes are such purists. I just see that, putting in the effort and all the work that they do. I mean, at the end of the day, they want to win because they won.
Yes, but
fair and square.
How many controversies? How many doping?
For sure. But what I'm saying is what I was going to say is it's no different. I mean, if that's going to happen in traditional sports, it's going to happen in esports. Exactly. Was my point. So I think at the end of the day, athletes are purists. Yeah. They want to win because they did it on their own. If we're going to see that happen. Exactly. But if you're going to see it happen in traditional sports, it's going to happen in esports. I mean, I don't think it's, No,
I think that's going to happen. I think you'll find, you'll find how many professional athletes here in the U.S. got caught gambling. Pete Rose being one of the biggest examples who still isn't in the Hall of Fame because of him, he was betting on games. Now he wasn't trying to throw games, so he was just betting on it.
Right.
I have to imagine that's going to happen. Corruption is going to happen wherever there's success. I mean, that's
money involved.
And big money involved. So I think the fact that esports are taking a cue from more traditional sports and putting in cautions to avoid those things happening or to stop them when they do is smart business, period.
Okay, so in amongst all of this, I think one of the interesting things that people don't often consider is the pressures that suddenly occur when you have success in your sport. Now, again, this is one of those things that for traditional sports, it's a very understood model. You're good at whatever you do, you get taken into a pro league and you become famous and, people want to be you and they want your autograph and they want your photo and all the rest of that stuff. And that's kind of an expectation that you're going to have some kind of bubble of that thing happening to you. I don't think, again, that people quite appreciate how much that happens within the esports world as well. And oftentimes, as with anybody who gets thrust into the limelight and suddenly finds themselves in the center of a social media whirlwind as such, how they cope with that, what the mental preparation is for something like that, and if there is a way to mentally prepare for that kind of thing. Is this something that you talk to any athletes about?
It is. At the distillery, we've sort of, we've redefined athletic intelligence and taken sort of the very traditional definition of it. And we've talked to our clients about some of the different factors that we think athletes possess and then what we think we can use to redefine athletic intelligence. And I think that we see some of those same factors in esports. When I was doing some research for the show, I was reading about a cyber athlete by the name of Lee Rush Yoon-jae, who took off from what I understand, about 18 months, a year and a half to sort of, refocus himself, just hone his skills and come back stronger and new. But one of the factors that he attributed having to take that time off to was the fact that he was so distracted by how much time he was spending engaging with his fans. And I think that athletes really possess a few different gifts. And some of that is what we talk to our clients about, that ability to really be able to, stop for a second. When you know that you have to pause, stop for a second and figure out what's next. I think athletes are great at doing that. And again, I think cyber athletes are certainly showing us that they're able to do that. Knowing how to be uncomfortable, how to really embrace failure. I think those are all gifts that we see in athletes, but cyber athletes as well.
The pressures do have negative side effects.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that we've found in working with our clients. First of all, when all of a sudden you make big money, and you have a bunch of people around you who now want to help you manage it, or who, you're ill-equipped to do it, because basically what you've been doing is honing your skill. You haven't been figuring out how to do a 401k plan and where to invest. So you see a lot of traditional athletes losing lots of big money. The other thing I would say we've seen many times is, athletes who walk into an arena, and these eSports arena are now no different than walking into a big, soccer stadium, football stadium, whatever, where you are cheered for, and the accolades and the feedback are instantaneous, and the noise around you is quite loud. And one of the things that we've found with athletes as they move on from their pro careers, or even at their collegiate level, is that loss of instantaneous feedback and love, and being put on a pedestal and hearing the applause is a very big letdown. And I imagine that the same will be true in esports, because even though you can play for a lot longer, my guess is that your skills are going to decline over time as we get older, as with anything. Your hand-eye coordination, even though you can still play when you're 60, I can promise you that my playing skills diminish as your eyesight, you've got other things going on. So I think you'll see that happening in esports, as well as what Era was talking about.
Interesting. What would be the kind of advice that you would give to these young, I'm not going to say athletes, but young esports gamers who are kind of entering into the arena, so to speak, who maybe don't or haven't given any real thought to what are the skill sets that they need to be thinking about? What are the mindsets that they need to be thinking about? What kind of advice would you give to somebody like that who's thinking about perhaps, beefing up on their Overwatch skills or whatever the game is of choice? What would be the thing that you would say to them?
I think the most important thing that we see is crucial to any athlete's success on, or off the field or court is really having key mentorship in place. I think, having a network of people that you really trust, who have been there, who have done it, who can walk you through some of the pitfalls. I think it's crucial. I mean, I would imagine that in esports, like we see with traditional sports, there are so many people who are willing to come back and share their story to sort of, help set the younger ones up for success, moving through the ranks. I think that's crucial. Really good mentorship.
I think I agree with Era, but I would also say, as much as you have to focus and be a little bit, blinded to other things going on, please don't forget that this isn't everything. You want to have and develop life skills and a life beyond esports or any sports. And that's one of the things that we see in our business, is that because the focus has been so intense for so many years, you have to remember in professional athletes here in the US often start from an incredibly young age, as they do say in soccer, in soccer or football that are known around the world. You're trained from very young age, and you're very focused. And what ends up happening is, when you are no longer doing it because you don't want to, or because of injury, or because you're older and it's time to retire, many athletes don't know what they want to do next because they never planned for next. So my advice also would be, or our advice is often to our athletes that we meet, especially when they're young, is you don't have to put even 90% of your brain power against thinking about it, but you have to put some of your brain power about thinking about your life beyond what you're doing right now, and set yourself up so that when you're ready to be done, you have something else that can fulfill you the same way.
That's a really interesting point, in as much as I don't think that there are many people who are currently in esports who are really thinking beyond the moment of what they're doing at that very moment in time. And I can see how anybody who has spent a good portion of their life focused on one specific thing, with the removal of that thing, I can see that somebody would be a little bit kind of lost as to what they need to do next, or what they want to do next. But I am kind of curious from your perspective, what it is that you think would need to change, be that a cultural thing or a technological thing, that's going to help people to really be able to see the shift in esports as something that is frivolous and not to be taken seriously, to being that thing that actually they can compare it to sports. They can understand that there is actually an affinity between these things. What would be the thing that you think needs to happen to kind of help make that shift occur?
We probably will have not differing opinions, but more than one. I think, there's a very interesting article about a very famous basketball player who's now retired named Rick Fox, who has he's created a team, that is now playing in the League of Legends forum. And Rick Fox is highly respected. He's well known as a good businessman. And the fact that he has, I think, validated and talks about esports as being a real business and he talks about how they have trainers and they have all the nutritionists and the regime that they put their athletes through. When you have a former athlete who has won 3 national championships in basketball, who was a star basketball player in college, saying that, I think more people will take it more seriously. So I think it's validation from the traditional athletic world that will help bridge that.
Okay. What about you, Ira? What's your thoughts on that?
I would say I could actually almost play off of that, because Rick Fox also talks a great deal about what was most important as he transitioned outside of his life in basketball and moved into the business world, was to make sure he was doing something he was passionate about. And what I was going to say is just, what's going to be that shift? I think it's an open mind to really accepting what people are passionate about. I think because if you are doing what you are passionate about, you're going to be willing to put in the effort and the time it takes to become good at that. And if you take the time to become good and develop those skills, you're going to be really productive. And I don't think there's anything wrong with really seeing a world where people are enjoying what they do. They're putting in the effort and the time to learn those skills. They're honing those skills. They're passionate about it, and they're sharing that passion all around the world. I think it's a great thing. So
wonderful. Okay. Well, as always, we'd like to give our listeners a way to find out a little bit more about what you're up to. And we ask you to do that by sharing with us your social media handle of choice. What would that be?
Twitter, no. You can find us at our Facebook page, which is the Distillery Inc., or our website, I would say, www.thedistilleryinc.com.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. And thank you for listening. If you enjoy this content, don't forget to subscribe and review, and follow us on Twitter at Digital Jam Ltd. Thinking of starting your own podcast? Why not speak to the GL Pro UK team? They handle all of our podcasting service needs. Tell them that Digital Jam Session sent you, and you'll get 10% off your first order. Find out more at www.glpro.co.uk. DigitalJamSessions.com